Hello friends, I am Dr. Deepak Garg. I am an orthopedic surgeon and today we will discuss about shoulder dislocation and all about how to take management decisions in cases of either acute shoulder dislocations or recurrent shoulder dislocations. So the broadly discussing the shoulder dislocation is of three types: anterior, posterior and inferior. Anterior is the most common type of shoulder dislocation which constitutes 95% of all the shoulder dislocations. Generally our shoulder joint capsule is weakest anteriorly, and when there is a abduction and external rotation force we can have a anterior dislocation. Similarly, the posterior dislocation is due to the posterior force with the shoulder in internal rotation, and the most commonly seen in tonic-clonic seizures and or in electrocutions. Similarly, inferior shoulder dislocation is very rare. It constitutes less than 1% of all the cases of shoulder dislocation. It is also known as luxatio erecta because the patients will usually hold the arm in hyperabduction, and it is usually due to the forced hyperabduction. Now, what is a Hill sac lesion in an anterior shoulder dislocation? When a patient will have anterior shoulder dislocation, either it is a first time or the recurrent shoulder dislocation, he will have Hill sac lesion. The chances are approximately 30 to 40%. So in the Hill sac lesion, in an anterior dislocation, when the humeral head is compressed against the anterior part of the glenoid labrum, this is called Hill sac lesion. And these compression fractures on posterolateral humeral head are seen in 94% of the cases with recurrent shoulder dislocation. So that means if a patient will have a recurrent shoulder dislocation, almost always he will have a Hill sac lesion, no matter what the size is. But in acute shoulder dislocations, approximately 30 to 40% of the patients will have Hill sac lesion. Similarly, what is a Bankart lesion? So the Bankart lesion is a rupture of the anterior and inferior glenoid labrum. It is called Bankart lesion. So on the side of the Bankart, on inferior and on the anterior side. So this may also lead to avulsion of the glenoid labrum. That means there can be a bony chip along with this labrum. So this is called bony Bankart lesion. So a patient with a recurrent shoulder dislocation, the chances of having a Bankart lesion are approximately 86%. So very high chances of getting Hill sac as well as Bankart lesion in a patient with recurrent shoulder dislocations. So if a patient is having both the Hill sac lesion and the Bankart lesion, then this is called bipolar lesion. So if a patient with a recurrent shoulder dislocation, there are approximately 81% chances of having the bipolar lesions. So if a patient presenting to us with a shoulder dislocation, whether the first time or recurrent, usually he can have the neurovascular injuries, soft tissue injuries, or in the neurovascular injuries, the incidence of axillary nerve injury is approximately 37%. This may lead to sensory loss on the lateral shoulder and weakness or atrophy of the deltoid muscle. Similarly, the soft tissue injuries, he can have rotator cuff tears, ligament injuries, which ultimately may lead to instability and recurrent shoulder dislocations. Approximately 40% of the patients will recur within 1 year with these injuries. So now we imagine a scenario in our OPD when the patient is presenting to us for the first time after the dislocation. So we will take a thorough history and clinical examination. Then we will take the X-ray. We will look for the glenoid and disruption. And about the MRI, we should get the MRI early in cases of any doubt on the X-rays about any Bankart lesion or Hill sac lesion. If the patient's age is more than 40 years, we should get the MRI early. We should not hesitate taking the MRI. And if the patient's forward flexion is less than 40 to 50 degrees, then we consider it as a tough cuff tear and we get the MRIs. So the imaging investigations that we usually do are X-ray, CT and MRI just to evaluate the patient's condition. CT is usually to assess the bony loss in Hill sac or Bankart lesion and for the surgical planning. Now, these are the questions. Now the patient has come to us for the first time after the acute shoulder dislocation. Now the questions are: when should we call him again for the check x-rays? What should be the period of immobilization if we are planning for a conservative treatment? What should be the position of immobilization, and what should be the rehabilitation duration? And when can the patient go back to the activities of daily living, or when can go back to the sports? And what are the factors that may lead to the redislocation or the recurrent shoulder dislocations? So let's cover the questions one by one. About the check x-rays or about the follow-up period, we should usually get the check x-rays after the 3 weeks, so we should get a follow-up within 3 weeks. And we should, in the initial first day, we should always have a pre and post reduction x-rays, both AP and the lateral views. Now about the duration of immobilization, how long we should immobilize, there is no correct answer for this question, but we immobilize usually for 1 to 3 weeks, and after the 2 weeks of immobilization we will usually start with few exercises like pendulum exercises, elbow range of motion exercises, and this will again depend upon the patient's comfort level. Now what should be the position of immobilization? So now we have the option of keeping the limb in internal rotation immobilization or external rotation immobilization. Now if we want to keep the patient, usually the traditionally we follow to immobilize the patient's limb in internal rotation, but there are few studies which have found that if we immobilize the patient's shoulder in external rotation, usually we immobilize in 20 degrees of external rotation and abduction, so that gives a better result because the recurrence rate is significantly reduced if we immobilize in external rotation position. But because it is very difficult and the patient's compliance is very poor if we immobilize in external rotation position, so the recommendations are we can still continue to keep the immobilize the limb in internal rotation, because many studies have also found that there is no difference in recurrence rate in young patients, and because the compliance is very poor. And but if the age is less than 30 years at the first dislocator, then we will consider immobilizing in an external rotation. Now the patient is coming to us for the first time after the dislocation, and we have reduced the dislocation. Now if we want to decide about the surgical versus non-surgical, now it is a tough decision because of in the first time dislocator. In recurrent dislocator there are almost always surgery is required, but in the first time dislocators it is usually difficult to decide about it. So if the age of the patient is less than 25 years at the first dislocation, so there are 80 to 90% chances of redislocation. So consider surgery if the patient is young, that is definite. Number 2 is get the MRI early if the age of the patient is more than 40 years, and we take decision according to the MRI. There are Hill-Sachs lesions or there are Bankhart's lesions, the size of the lesion, on track, off track lesions. So let's discuss about all these things in recurrent shoulder dislocations in detail. So now what is the rehab program? If we follow the conservative treatment, we usually immobilize for 3 weeks, for 1 to 3 weeks. We start the passive ROM, active assisted range of motion. First we will start with the passive range of motion after 3 weeks of the shoulder, then we will use the active assisted range of motion, then active range of motion. So simultaneously we will start with the isometric, then isotonic, and then we will start further strengthening with TheraBand and maybe some weight. And then we will rehab at least for 3 months before the patient will go for the activity of daily living or at least sports. Now when the patient is going for the activity of daily living after 3 months, then we will allow the activities as per the pain tolerance, and we will avoid abduction and external rotation and overhead abduction. So this was about the acute shoulder dislocation. Now what are the factors that influence recurrent shoulder dislocations? Now if age of the patient at the first dislocation is less than 20 years, there are high chance that he will dislocate again. Then if the patient will return to the sports activities early after the dislocation, then high chance of redislocation. If the patient is having hyperlaxity of the capsule, then again high chances of shoulder dislocation. If there is any presence of any bony defect like Hill sacks or Bankhart's, then again there is a high chance of recurrent shoulder dislocation. Let's just understand little bit about the pathoanatomy in recurrent shoulder dislocation. Now in acute dislocator, if the patient is having the acute dislocation, then there are high chances that he has a rupture of the capsule. He can have at least the anterior-inferior part of the capsule is ruptured. Sometimes he can have a labral tear, as we have already seen 30 to 40% of the patient may have the Bankhart's lesion or the Hill-Sachs lesion, and sometimes there can be a tear on the posterior aspect of the capsule also. So the acute dislocators, because of the tear of the capsule and the bony lesions or the labral region, may have redislocations. Now hyperlaxity of the capsule. For that we calculate a Beaton score. We look at a generalized laxity. If the patient is having a generalized hyperlaxity, then high chances that he is having a capsular hyperlaxity. These are the patients without trauma who dislocate without trauma. So there is a hyperlaxity of the capsule, and that may lead to the further weakening of the capsule, more movement of the shoulder, humeral head inside the shoulder, and patient can have recurrent shoulder dislocations. Now circle concept of structural damage. Circle concept states that when the patient is having dislocation, the dislocation, whether this is anterior, posterior or any dislocation, the structures which are damaged cannot be only the anterior structures, they can be posterior structures will also be damaged during the anterior dislocation. So there is an entire weakening of the shoulder capsule and the glenohumeral ligament. So that will lead to ultimately will lead to the recurrent shoulder dislocations in the future. Then other pathoanatomy is a bony lesions, whether this is a Hill-Sachs or the Bankhart's, that we have already seen. So these regions we should always know planning for the shoulder dislocation patients. Now the patient is coming to us in the OPD with the recurrent shoulder dislocations, and we have get the MRI. Now we have the patient with us with recurrent shoulder dislocations and MRI report in front of us. Now how will you plan the treatment? Now if the patient is having labral tears, then if the patient is having traumatic Bankhart's lesion, that means a humeral labral avulsion at the antero-inferior part, then we will just go for the capsulolabral repair. If the patient is having acute bony Bankhart's lesion, that is a bony chip of the Bankhart's lesion, then on the labral side, then we will try to fix it. If it is a large lesion, can be fixed with a screw, we will fix with a screw, or we can sometimes plan to use a suture anchor so that we can fix the bony lesion. Now if there is a bone loss on the glenoid side, the bone loss is less than 25%, then we will go for a Latarjet procedure. We will discuss about this procedure in an animation in next few slides, and in this we use the autologous coracoid process to reconstruct the glenoid. If the bone loss on the glenoid side is more than 40%, then we can go for a Eden Hibinete procedure. In this procedure, instead of using a coracoid process, we use the autologous tricortical iliac crest, and then we try to reconstruct the glenoid process, the glenoid bone. So if there is a bone loss or there is on the humeral side, that means the Hill-Sachs lesion, and if the bone loss is 20% with the glenoid defect, then we will go definitely for the capsulolabral repair. Along with the capsular shift, we will discuss about the details of this surgery, what we actually do in these surgeries in next few slides. And we do, along with the capsular shift, we can go for remplissage. We should go for remplissage. And if the bone loss is 25%, which is maybe approximately about more than equal to 6 mm depth, then we definitely go for remplissage. And if the bone loss is approximately 40%, the bone loss on the humeral side is 40%, then we go for Latarjet to increase the rotational arc of the humerus, and we can go for osteochondral allograft for reconstruction of the humeral bone loss. Now if there are bone loss only on the humeral side without bone loss on the glenoid side, only the Hill-Sachs lesion, there is no Bankhart's lesion, then if the bone loss is less than or equal to 10%, then we can ignore it. We may not do anything. If the bone loss is 10 to 20%, then we may have to go for remplissage. If it is more than 20% off track, what is off track, on track, we discussed in the later slides. If it is 20% off track, we can go for osteochondral allografts. If it is more than 20% on track, then we again can go for remplissage. if it is more than 40% humeral bone loss, we already saw in the previous slides, we can go for the allograft transfer, or if arthritis is present, then we can go for a reverse shoulder arthroplasty, or sometimes partial replacement with a cobalt chrome articular components. Sometimes some people have used osteotomies, but no longer use osteotomies for the humeral bone loss, or sometimes somebody can try have the expertise. Now let's look about the few surgeries, how we perform the surgeries. So let's take a look at capsular shift. So we can see with this animation we are taking a incision at the, we already know the capsular part is weakest at antero-inferior and there is a laxity. So we fold the capsules and then we, after folding the capsule, we suture on the folded part of the capsule so that the capsule is strengthened, and we can treat the laxity here. This procedure is called capsular shift. Now what is a Bankart repair? So in the animation we can see there is a antero-inferior part of the glenoid is broken, so this is called a Bankart lesion. So now we go arthroscopically and we prepare the bone, and then we use the suture anchors and we repair the labral tear. And this procedure of repairing the Bankart lesion on the antero-inferior side of the glenoid is called the labral repair. We do it arthroscopically. Then what is Letarget procedure? So we can see that in this animation this is a coracoid process. We cut the coracoid process, and this is showing the cut part of the coracoid process, and on one side of the coracoid process we freshen the bone and till the fresh bleeding. So this is the bone freshened. Then we turn the bone on the side of the coracoid and we rotate this piece and we fix this piece on the bone loss at the side of the glenoid to reconstruct the glenoid part, and this is called Letarget procedure. Similarly, if we talk about the Remplissage procedure, this will involve a posterior capsulodisc and infraspinatus stenodesis to fill the defect in the humeral head, and this is usually we do in cases of the Hill-Sachs lesion, 20% or 25% of the lesion, and so that the Hill-Sachs lesion is filled and then it will reduce the chances of redislocation. So now another procedure that we want to discuss, another thing is a on track and off track lesion. So now what is a glenoid track? So when there is any movement inside the shoulder joint, there will be a contact zone of the humeral head and the glenoid. So that contact zone of the glenoid on the humeral head with the arm in extremes of range of motion. So that amount of the contact of the humeral head with the glenoid in extremes of the motion, specifically abduction, external rotation, that contact is called glenoid track. And usually in a normal individual without any Hill-Sachs or without any Bankart lesion, without any dislocation, that amount of the humeral head that is having in contact with the glenoid is 83%. So in this picture we can see AD is a glenoid horizontal line and CD is the amount of the humeral bone that is in contact with the glenoid. So if we calculate CD, it should be 83% of AB, and we calculate the C, we start from the footprint on the humeral head. Footprint is the amount where we will have where this bone is attached on the humeral head. So now what is on track and off track lesions? So we already know by now. Let's talk about a situation, patient with a bipolar bone loss. We get a CT scan and we get an N face view, and this is a glenoid bone, and let's measure the greatest width or the horizontal width of the glenoid, and let's donate this width with a line AB. So what is AB? AB is a horizontal width of the glenoid. And now if we want to calculate the glenoid track, so we already know that the 83% of the humeral head will be in contact with the glenoid in extremes of the motion, specifically abduction and external rotation, and so 83% of the AB is CD that is glenoid tract. So we already now know that the CD is the amount of glenoid tract, say maybe it may be 2 centimeter or 2.5 centimeter. So if we draw a line considering the glenoid tract immediately medial to the footprint, so this is a footprint where the rotator cuff muscles will attach, and now from the footprint we calculate the amount of the tract of the amount of the humeral head in contact with the glenoid. So in this lesion it will fall, this tract will cover this lesion, so it will be beyond this lesion, this will be medial to the lesion. So if the lesion fall within the glenoid tract from the footprint on humeral head, then it is called on track lesion. So this in this picture, this is a on track lesion. So if the patient is having a on track lesion, so that means when there will be a motion, that lesion will stay in contact with the glenoid and that lesion will not go beyond the glenoid margins. So that means the chances of dislocations are less in on track lesions. So in these lesions we can still continue with the arthroscopic Bankart lesions. If we talk about the off track lesions, so if this amount, that 83% of the glenoid that we have calculated from the CT is on the lateral side of the tract or on the lateral side of this lesion, that means the lesion is large or lesion is on the medial side of this 83% of the tract. So that means when the movement or the extreme of the movement will happen, this lesion will not stay in the contact or in the glenoid tract. This lesion will go beyond the glenoid tract and this lesion will go and hit the margin on the glenoid. So there are high chances of dislocation and this lesion is called off track lesion. So when the patient is having off track lesion, we already know that there are high chances of redislocation. So we need to consider the bony reconstruction, for example the Letarget procedure. So now if we will do the Letarget procedure, so that will increase the glenoid tract. So this lesion which is off track, now after doing the Letarget procedure may become on track. So this is how the Letarget procedure may help in patients with Hill-Sachs lesion. So now when there is a glenoid bone loss with bipolar bony lesions, that means the Hill-Sachs lesion is also there and Bankart lesion is also there, then how will we evaluate this? So again in this situation we calculate the AB is again the maximum horizontal width of the glenoid. Then we calculate the intact glenoid width, that is AE in our case, and then we calculate so in this case EB is a glenoid bone loss. Then we calculate the glenoid tract, that is 83% of the intact part of the glenoid. Now it is 83% of AE and not AB. And then similarly we go and calculate the on track and off track lesions. Now if it is the lesion is on the medial side of the tract, then it is off track. If it is on the lateral side, that means the length of the tract is covering the lesion, that means it is on track lesion. So now calculate the same for the on track and off track. If the lesion is on the lateral side, it is on track. If it is on the medial side, then it is off track. Now we have understood this concept of on track and off track lesions. Now what is the treatment according to the on track and off track? Now there is a glenoid bone loss less than 25%, we go for Letarget procedure. If there is a more than 40%, again we have seen that we go for Eden-Hibinette procedure, where we will use the iliac crest bone. Now if the glenoid bone loss is less than 25% and it is on track, then we will go for arthroscopic Bankart's repair. If the bone loss on the glenoid side is more than 25%, we go for Letarget procedure. We already know this in the on track lesion. But if the lesion is off track, that means the lesion is on the medial side of the humeral head, then even if it is 0 to 13.5% of the bone loss, then we will have to go for Riamplis's procedure or Letarget procedure or open capsular shift. If it is 13.5 to 25%, then definitely we have to go for Letarsat procedure. So that means there is a bipolar lesion, there is a both glenoid lesion and the humeral lesion. Humeral bone loss is 0 to 13.5%, but off track, that means on the medial side. Then also we have to go for some procedure, for example Letarsat procedure or knee amplices procedure, so that we will increase the track or we will decrease the humeral head defect. Or if it is 13.5 to 25%, then we go for Letarsat procedure. Usually we will not go for Letarsat procedure if it is on track. So it is very important to calculate whether the lesion is on track or off track. So guys, this was about our video today about the shoulder dislocations, acute and chronic. For more such video, please like, share and subscribe to our channels. Thank you guys, thank you very much.